Hi, my name is John Chirtea, and I'm going to tell you what I know about button making in Milton, Delaware. Button making was one of the major industries throughout Delaware and many parts of Maryland. In Milton in particular, there were literally hundreds of people who were involved in the button cutting business. And how did they do it? They had a machine, they had people that brought shells in to cut the button blanks, and that's what I'm going to do today. I'm going to tell you a little bit about the people, and I'm going to tell you about the machine that actually did it, and then we're actually going to cut a button, and you'll see a button magically appear. So first let's talk about the people, and to tell you someone who exemplified that is a gentleman by the name of Preston Chandler. Preston died in about 1985. He was killed in a car accident. And this is the machine that I pulled out of his shop, restored the whole thing, and he did this for about 60 years of his life. And he did it, and he cut buttons for many years, and he did it all on this little machine right here. And there were others like him. There were some folks that had big factories. They'd have 100, 200 people working in the factory cutting buttons. And that was the main thing that was done in Milton, was the cutting of the button blanks themselves. Not the polishing and the cutting of the holes. That would have been done elsewhere. So it was a major industry. Some people would have a business where they would have a bunch of these machines and they would farm them out to folks around town. The cottage industry, a lady or a gentleman might have one of these in their basement and they would cut buttons. Someone would bring them the shells, generally abalone shells, and they would cut button blanks, and then they would pay by the pound, how many pounds of button blanks they cut. So those were the people who actually did it. If you know anybody that you run into who remembers his father, his grandfather, you might get a story about, well, my father did that, or my grandfather, or my great-grandfather was one of the original button cutters. And you'll find a lot of those people who can tell you probably more about button cutting than I can. But I can demonstrate how a button blank is cut. And it was done on this machine right here, which is a relatively simple machine. It's basically a lathe, similar to a wood lathe or a metal cutting lathe. It has a pulley that's turned by this belt that's connected to a motor down at the bottom of the machine here. And that motor had two pulleys on it. One of them turned this wheel, and the second one turned a little fan. It was a vacuum cleaner, basically, and what it would do would be suck the dust as the button was being cut, and then it would exhale the dust to the outside of the shed or the porch or wherever the button cutter happened to be sitting. So then this would turn, and it would turn this little mandrel right here, this portion here. This came in various sizes. You'd have big ones and you'd have small ones. And based on the size of the cutter here, it would regulate how big the blank was, how big the button blank was that it cuts. And that's the cutter. That's the portion that turned. And then you had a stationary thing back here, which was like a cutter. It had teeth on it, but it was stationary, and it held the shell in place while the cutter would actually cut the button. So with that, let's actually cut a button. We'll start the motor. The motor turns the pulley. Our little vacuum cleaner, I can feel, is pulling any dust out that we'll make. The cutter is turning, and the stationary cutter is sitting right here. So you take a shell, an abalone shell generally, I'll tell you more about that later, and you insert it in between the cutter and the stationary holder. Hold that tight against there. I have a handle back here. As you can see, it's moving the mandrel over, and it's cutting into the button, into the shell. It's cut all the way through now, and I retract that. Take the shell out, and the button drops right into my hand. And you have a shiny little button blank. I'll cut one more quickly here so you can see it again. We put the shell in between, hold it against the stationary part, and the push our handle here. The button is cut through. Remove the shell, and the button did drop out. It missed my hand though, and so we had a button. Now, what pushed the button out of the cutter was this little device here that you might be able to see right here, that when I retract the pulley, this pushes out and it pushes the button and it drops down into the pan. So that's how you cut buttons. That's who did it, the people in Milton. Various other communities throughout Delaware and Maryland, they were the ones that did this. It was a business, and it was a big business. So if you'd like to learn a lot more about button cutting, we invite you to come to the Milton Historical Society. There's a major display there. The machine is there. We might even be here demonstrating it, and we welcome you to come and see one of the main industries that kept Milton, Delaware alive in the past. Thank you.